Hello, and I hope you enjoy the morning session and that you enjoy the break too, and you got to meet very interesting people. My duty now is to make a small introduction for Ricardo Hausmann. So let me tell you a little bit of Ricardo, and because he's a person that I know actually personally very well. We have been working together for like around 6 or 7 years, and once Joe invited me to actually be part of this meeting, he was one of the first persons that I thought that I wanted to bring here to actually bring into the Media Lab community, to share his ideas. Ricardo, he's an economist, but we're not going to hold him responsible for that. It's actually, although I have had my own quarrels with economists, he's one of the most open-minded person and the most, intellectually promiscuous persons that I know. He knows about everything in actually quite detail. He has this photographic memory that, he's an atheist that can quote things from the Bible. It goes to that level. Ricardo, actually, we started working in 2006, and we have built a friendship and a collaboration since then. And I've been with him several times, actually visiting countries. And it's amazing how he would wake up at 6 a.m. and would meet with ministers and presidents and different people all over the day. Is a tireless worker in the field of development, and he's very experienced in it. And all those years of experience have allowed him to develop a very interesting way to look at the world. So it's a great honor for me to introduce Ricardo Hausmann and to present it to all of you. Ricardo is going to be talking about how to infer what countries know from what they produce and why it matters. In the language that we introduced this morning is how to count the number of people bytes that a country has and why we should care about these people byte measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. This is a great honor and a great opportunity for me to come to the Media Lab. I have been spending the weekends until 2 a.m. in the morning for the last 2 months here at the Media Lab because I've been working with Cesar on this book that we're putting out in 2 weeks' time. It's called The Atlas of Economic Complexity. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about, so you see that there's Cesar and myself there, and it's in the process of building this research and thinking about these issues that we have come up with some of these ideas that we will keep on talking about. So I'm from Venezuela, and I'm supposed to care about why countries are rich and why countries are poor. So we know, for example, in the U.S., that the U.S. is an economy that has grown enormously. And this is the income per capita of the U.S. since 1500. And since 1820, it has gone up, income per capita has gone up by 25 times. So the U.S., now people in the U.S. on average are 25 times richer than they were in 1820. So that's a big number, 25 times. Now you might say, well, this is probably a universal phenomenon. By the way, let me just show you this in logarithmic scale so that you see that in logarithmic scale, the slope is the speed, the top line is the UK, the bottom line is the US, and you see that the US, I don't know if you can see that there's sort of like an acceleration of growth, and it keeps on accelerating. It's been in this accelerating path and something that did not happen before 1700. It sort of like got its act together around 1800, and it's been on an accelerating path over the last 2 centuries. So you say, this is probably a universal phenomenon. Well, it's not. This graph here shows how many times richer is the US than these other countries. And you see that between, say, 1820 and 1970, the US went from being like 3 times richer than China in income per capita to being over 20 times richer than China in income per capita. So this explosion of income per capita in the US was not a universal phenomenon. It was a particular phenomenon. It happened in one part of the world. It didn't happen across the world. In India, the US was 20 times richer. Now, what's a lot in the press in these last a few years is the fact that now these countries are starting to catch up. So the US is now only like 5 times richer than China in per capita income, and about 10, 12 times richer than India in per capita terms. But for the first time, this stuff now seems to be converging back. So this phenomenon that happened for 200 years in the US, the spectacular increases in income per capita, are now being seen in the rest of the world, and in fact, at an even faster pace than the US. Now, it's not happening everywhere. Here I have a graph that shows when, my data starts in 1960, what is the date in which these countries reached the minimum gap with the US income? Okay? When were they closest to the US? And there are 69 countries that are closest to the US now, maybe some other 10 countries that are closest to the US sometime between 2000 and now. But for 130 countries, they used to be closer to the US than they're now. So they're still diverging. They're still not catching up. So some countries are catching up, other countries are not catching up. Okay? So the questions this introduction is meant to raise is, why are we so much richer than we were before? And the implicit answer we always have is that we are richer because we know more. In 1820, people did not know about bicycles. They did not know about cars. They did not know about calculators. They did not know about computers. They did not know about antibiotics. They did not know about a bunch of stuff. And now we know much more than they did, so now we can generate much more prosperity than they did. Now the question I'm going to ask is, who knows more? Who is it that knows more? And I'm going to ask the question of, if it's just a question of learning more, why doesn't everybody learn? Why does it happen in one place and not in others? Okay? So those are the central questions I'm going to ask. So first question is, I'm going to ask, who knows more? So let's take an Inuit. Inuit. So here is the Inuit providing for the family. Here is the Inuit building the home. And here is the Inuit system of transportation. Now you might ask yourself the question, who knows more, an Inuit or a modern man? And obviously, that question is a tricky question. Because if you see this modern man, he has no clue as to how to make a pair of glasses, how to make a sweater, how to make a pen, how to make paper, or how to make a computer. He doesn't know how to fish. He doesn't know how to make his own home. He doesn't know anything. I mean, modern man is a useless guy. You don't have to take modern man to the Arctic for the guy to die. So I don't think it is irrelevant to ask the question whether this individual Inuit knows more or less than this individual modern man. That is not where the difference lies. It does not lie in the fact that we are individually smarter. It lies in the fact that the society as a whole is smarter. So I come from a venerable institution, Harvard, which was founded in 1636. And it started in this building, Massachusetts Hall. It then grew to be this big, and it then grew to be bigger. And you see now there's a law school and the Kennedy School, and this is the way it looks now. So Harvard has become bigger. Knowledge in the period since 1636 has expanded. And with knowledge, Harvard has expanded its operations, and it now has more students. In 1636, a college degree lasted 4 years. Now that we have so much more knowledge, obviously, a college degree lasts 42 years. No. So how did the system cope with an expanded amount of knowledge? How did the system cope with an expanded amount of knowledge? Not by dumping more knowledge on each individual, but by splitting the knowledge into different specialties. And this is the list of major concentrations that Harvard recognizes today. Okay? So there has been a differentiation of the pieces of knowledge, so we put different pieces of knowledge in different people's heads. So the only way to scale the amount of knowledge that a society has is to distribute that knowledge across different members of society, different pieces of knowledge to different members of society. But knowledge to make things is hard to acquire. We proud ourselves that we put everything on the internet, that all our papers are on the internet. And then ask yourself, how come we can charge $40,000 a year for people to come to Harvard to listen to us if everything was on the internet? Moving things from the internet to brains is a very costly experience. So I don't know how many guys know who this guy is. Who is this guy? Michael Jordan. Playing baseball, complete failure, right? He spent his time learning basketball. He was an extremely talented sportsman, but not talented enough to become a professional player both in baseball and in basketball. It shows how much effort and time it gets to become good at something. So Michael Jordan is our best example that you cannot put an infinite amount of know-how into an individual, no matter how talented he is. There is this limit to how much knowledge people can have, and that's why we have coined this term person byte as the limit of knowledge that a person has. And then if you want to make knowledge, you have to put person byte together, and you have to put these person byte togethers, and these things we call people bytes, okay? So this is just, so we need to specialize because we cannot become good at baseball and basketball and spend 42 years in college. So we need to specialize. But then we need to ask ourselves, how does a society increase the total amount of knowledge it has if its individuals have a limit? So society acquires more knowledge by distributing that knowledge across people in society. And then if you ask yourself the question, how much knowledge do I need to make a product? You probably need more knowledge than fits in the head of a single person. So we are all really moved by the fact that Steve Jobs has passed away. Now, Steve Jobs would be the first guy to say that he does not know how to make a computer, that making a computer is a team sport, that there's no way people can acquire the amount of knowledge that is required to make anything. Modern man is useless as an individual. So the way societies work is that you put different bits of know-how, different person bytes together in organizations, and maybe sometimes the organization is too small, it cannot cope with the amount of gathering people and putting them together. So instead we split it up into several organizations. And instead of knowing how to make my inputs, I just buy my inputs. And I let the knowledge that goes into making the inputs being organized by a different organization. So the way the economy absorbs knowledge is by creating organizations which are networks of people, and then making these organizations interact with other organizations, which are networks of organizations. So that is why the theme of the meeting is networks, understanding networks. Okay, so let me give you this factoid. In the US, the average worker works in an organization that has 100 workers. In India, the average worker works in an organization that has 4 workers. That tells you something. The US is 12 times richer than India in per capita terms. I would put it to you that it has to do with how much knowledge gets embedded into the things that people do in the US versus how much knowledge gets embedded in the things people are doing in India on average. Not in Bangalore and so on and so forth, but on average. So in an organization of 4 people, you can at most put together something that takes 4 person bytes if they all had different knowledge. So in a 4-person firm, you can only embed very little amount of knowledge. So you ask yourself, there's all this disappointment now about micro-lending. Why micro-lending has not been as transformative as people hoped? Well, it is because in a micro firm, there are so many person bytes you can mix together to make a complex product. So countries differ in the things they make. Some countries look like this, other countries look like this. Some places have a lot of people that are doing more or less very similar things, and other places are using people who know very different things, and things that are complementary that make working together the ability to make something that they could not make working apart. Okay, so this might be big, this is complex, right? The transformation in the US has involved going from this world to this world. Now, how are we going to measure the amount of knowledge that is in the economy? How would you go about measuring the amount of knowledge in the economy? Well, the first thing you would do is you would look at the world. And here's a picture of the world. Okay, so you look at the world. And what are you going to do with looking at the world? Well, this is a not particularly useful map of the world. So I'm going to present a different map of the world. So this is another map of the world. This one is much more informative. Okay? Let me tell you, how is this a picture of the world? Every line here is a country, and every column here is a product. And this is how much of each product each country exported. Okay? And I don't know what you see there, but I cannot see anything. So now here, countries are ordered alphabetically, and products are ordered according to their classification codes. So allow me to order countries differently, non-alphabetically, and maybe allow me to order products differently. So if I do that, I get this thing. Gee, this starts to look like order. So this looks like a triangle. And you might say, gee, is this a coincidence of this classification scheme? Let's look at other classification schemes. No, I always get this. By the way, this is with data collected by customs agencies. So this is data on goods traded between countries. So you might say, well, maybe there's something weird about goods traded, exported between countries. What happens if we look within countries? So we got this data set on Chile. So every line here is a municipality, and every column here is an industry. And the pixel says whether that municipality has that industry or not. Now, what does these triangles mean? Essentially, they mean the following, that it doesn't matter which one we do it, let's do it here, that some places make everything. They know how to make everything. Some places make very few things. Okay. Now, if you look at it this way, some products are made everywhere, and other products are made in few places. Okay. Now, what gives it the triangular shape is that the places that make few things make things everybody makes. And the places that make many things make those things too, but also things that few others make. This is telling us something about the nature of the world, and is going to be the trick we're going to use to get to measure how much people know to make. Okay. So essentially, what this is telling us is a certain relationship between countries and the products that they make. So in this particular case, and this is taken from actual data, of these products, Ghana exports only fish. Argentina exports fish, cheese, and cosmetics. And Netherlands exports fish, cheese, cosmetics, drugs, and X-ray machines. So Holland is telling us something, that they know how to make stuff that Ghana does not know how to make. But it also tells us that everybody's making fish, and 2 countries are making cheese, but very few countries are making X-ray machines. So it's telling us something about how hard these things are to make. So in essence, what we are going to say is that these matrices I've been showing you are networks that connect countries to the products that they make, or Chilean municipalities to the industries that they host. Okay? Now, what is really behind this is the following relationship, that you need person bytes to make stuff. And some stuff, like this one here, requires only, say, 3 person bytes, or 3 units of whatever it is, 3 dozen person bytes. While this one here is much more complex. It requires many more of these person bytes. Okay? So products differ in the amount of knowledge they embed, and countries differ in the amount of knowledge they embed. Okay, so when you put these 2 things together, this is going to tell us which is going to make what. So the substance that is explaining who does what and why some people are rich or not is what is the amount of person bytes that these societies hold. What is the amount of, what is the diversity of knowledge that they have? So it's a little bit like the game of Scrabble, right? The more letters you have, the more words you can make. The longer a word, the harder it will be for you to make it. Okay? So the same intuition here. Another one. If I give you one more letter, how many words can you make? Well, it depends on how many letters you already had. Right? So this is a little bit how the world of knowledge is going to operate. Knowledge is complementary, and combinations of knowledge allow you to make things. And if you miss some letters, there are some words that you won't be able to construct. So the intuition is that the more countries that have more person bytes will have what it takes to make more products. So they'll be more diversified. And I can look at how diversified are countries. Products that require more person bytes will only be done by countries that have what it takes. But fewer would be the countries that have what it takes to make products that require more person bytes. All right? So those products will be less common. They'll be less ubiquitous. Now, countries that have more person bytes will be able to make products that require more person bytes. But products that require more person bytes are less ubiquitous. So therefore, it must be the case that the diversification of countries is negatively related to the ubiquity of the products that the country makes. And I can do with that, I can look at the world, and lo and behold, this is true about the world. That if you look at the world, countries like Germany and the US are highly diversified and make things that few other countries make on average, and the poor countries of the world make few things and things everybody makes. Okay? So that's a fundamental intuition through which we are going to infer the amount of person bytes that countries have. Now, this is true not only for countries, it's also true for Chilean municipalities. So there is Santiago and the municipalities around Santiago, and this is where the penguins live. Okay? Same relationship. So, but actually, we can do better than this, and I won't go too much into that because I don't have that much time, and I want to play around with this. Simple countries make few things and things that everybody makes, and these countries that make these things also make few things, while complex countries make many things and things that few other countries make. And these countries, because they know so much, can make many things that few other countries can make, and so on. So the more I look through the neighbors of my neighbors and my neighbor's neighbors and my neighbor's neighbor's neighbors, this stuff is going to converge to a measure that we call economic complexity. Okay? And we have developed this measure of economic complexity, and this is the stuff on which we do a lot of things. And one of the things we do is to show that this stuff explains why countries are rich. If I just look at what things you know how to make, I can infer how rich you are. Okay? In some sense, we're using the same concept that for people who are here fans of American college football, is I want to know how many teams you have beaten, but I also want to know how many other teams the people you beat, right? Because the more, or the way they do tennis, right? Who is the best player in tennis? It's not just the guy who won more games, but it's the guy who won more games against better players, right? So it's the same trick. If you make many products, I just want to know not just how many products you made, but how many products were made by those countries that made those products and so on. So this is amazing. With this stuff, I can explain 73% of the variance of incomes across countries. Okay? The more person bytes you have here, the richer you are. Now, you're going to tell me, yeah, Professor Hausmann, but you know, 0.73 is not 1. There are errors here. To which you might say, well, you know, do you think I made a mistake? Or did the world make a mistake? Maybe the world is wrong and I'm right. So if the world is wrong, it says that Greece shouldn't be that rich. It should get in trouble. And India shouldn't be that poor. It should grow. Lo and behold, that's what we find. That this error is predictive of future growth. Okay? And not only is this error predictive of future growth, it's what allows us to predict the growth in the future. So this is our prediction for 2020 of which countries are going to grow. And the fastest growing countries in the world in per capita terms are going to be China, India, Thailand, followed by weird countries like Belarus, Moldova, Zimbabwe, which we think it's just a biological problem, get rid of the guy, and it will grow. They have many more person bytes than it would be justified by the level of income, and a similar story can be said about the Ukraine and so on. Now, so that's where we're getting in terms of just looking at person bytes and wondering whether it matters. But we are not the only ones who think that they know what the secret of development is and the secret of growth is. For example, very popular idea, it's all about education. Now you can imagine Cesar and I are in the education business. We are not going to trash our own industry, right? But there's been this debate saying, well, you know, the secret of development is education. So in education, they measure as years of schooling. What is the average years of schooling of the labor force? And you're going to ask yourself, well, maybe what we are measuring is essentially education. Who knows what? Education and so on. Well, what we are measuring is not really education, okay? It's somewhat weakly related to education. So this is the best measure of, this is years of schooling corrected for how well you did in some standardized exam across countries. So this is like the best measure of how well are people doing in their exams. So you have Korea, Singapore, Japan, and so on, with Finland, and so on, with very high educational levels. And this is our measure of economic complexity. But you know, the relationship is not that tight. The question is, who explains why countries are rich? Well, so here we compare our measure with measures of education in terms of which one explains why countries are rich. And lo and behold, our measure beats the hell out of all these education measures in terms of explaining of who's rich. Okay? Second, it not only explains who's rich, but it explains who will grow. So this is what is the ability of this measure of predicting who's going to grow. And if you use education, you essentially explain this much, all of the educational variables. If you use our measure, we predict much more. Okay? Now you might say, well, what about governance? And we can go back to Adam Smith, who said, you know, the only thing that is required for growth is peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. So what we should really be looking at is what is the quality of the governments and so on. And there's been a big effort to measure the quality of governments. And the World Bank has 6 indices of the quality of governments, which is political stability, voice and accountability, rule of law, regulatory quality, et cetera, et cetera. We ran a horse race between our measure and all of these measures combined. And you see, against all of these measures combined, we beat the hell out of them. Okay? There's more information about the ability to grow in our measures than there is in measures of the quality of government. Okay? In fact, the quality of government is not statistically real. At least the standardized measures of the quality of government, it does not do a good job at all at predicting future growth. So then you might say, well, but then, you know, this is just the same thing that the Global Competitiveness Report has been reporting on. And they measure not just the quality of education, but 1,000 other things. So, okay, so let's give them a chance, and let's beat the hell out of them, too. So, so we have much more capacity. What we are capturing is much more central to explain how countries are able to grow than what they're capturing, even though they are averaging across 180 measures, 180 variables that characterize countries. So, so then, you know, the story is very simple. Just get more person bytes. Why haven't they? Why have countries lagged 200 years in getting those person bytes? And the answer is that it faces a very serious chicken and egg problem. You cannot make watches without watchmakers. But nobody wants to become a watchmaker in a country that's not making watches. Moreover, if nobody's making watches, how are you going to learn to become a watchmaker? So that is going to create a problem in terms of expanding the set of person bytes that your society holds. How does the world deal with this problem? It deals with this problem by moving to nearby products, by products that require just 1 or 2 more person bytes that I don't have, so that I expand my process gradually. Well, what do we mean by nearby is something that we dedicated a lot of thought to, and that we published in a paper in 2007 with Laszlo Barabasi, who's speaking here this afternoon, I think. So this was a joint paper, which is the first collaboration between Cesar and myself. And here, every circle is a product, and it is related to other products, if you want, in terms of the similarity of the person bytes they require. So you see that this space is very uneven. Some places you can move from one product to another by just moving very few person bytes. In other places, products are very distant from each other, meaning that the next product requires a very different combination of person bytes, so it's harder to solve this chicken and egg problem. This is the re-estimated product space, as we call it, in the publication that is coming out in 2 weeks. And here we have been able to group products in communities. And these communities are things that sort of like share person bytes. It's sort of like, but we did not tell them what they have to be. We let the data tell us what these communities are, okay? What these communities of products are. And these communities differ in terms of how well connected they are. This is how centrally located they are. So the more centrally located they are, the easier it is for you to redeploy what you know into other products. And this is how complex these products are. So you see products like machinery and so on are very centrally located and very complex. And the countries that specialize in machinery have an easier time to keep on adding things than countries that specialize here in oil. So this is my excuse for my own country, that it's a product that is very far from any other product and it's not very complex. So if you specialize in that, it's very hard for you to get into this stairway to heaven. So let me just illustrate this with 2 examples. This is Ghana, and Ghana is the star performer of West Africa. And Ghana is a country that has invested very heavily in education, at least by the standards of Thailand. Okay? So Ghana is not that great a success story if you look at it in the longer term. So and Ghana is a country that was exporting cocoa, aluminum stuff, wood and stuff in 1975. That's what they knew how to make. And if you look at them in 2000, well, it's cocoa, aluminum, etc., wood, and maybe some uncut diamonds and fish and stuff. So that's the amount of transformation that happened. So when you look at what they know how to make, well, it went to hell in the 80s. It came back afterwards. But essentially, the amount of person bytes they have has not changed very significantly. They're making the same stuff they were making before. So if you look at where they are in this space, in this product space, the black squares are where they are. This is where they were in 1975. And this is where they are in 2000. This is the expansion of their person bytes, if you want, expressed in the kinds of things that they're able to do. OK, so let's look at Thailand. This is a laggard in terms of education. So in 1975, they were making sugar, vegetables, rubber, corn, rice, jute, tin, fish, all very agricultural products. By the year, for example, half a percent in machinery, 5% in labor-intensive products. If you look at the year 2000, they're making 49% in machinery, electronic microcircuits, electric motors, and so on, 17% in labor-intensive manufacturers, and so on. They've completely transformed what they do. They might have lagged in education. They have accumulated enormous person bytes in terms of the number of different things they're able to do. So when you look at their exports, they look like this. The old stuff is still there, but there's a bunch of new stuff that they can do now that they weren't doing before. So when you look at them in this product space, the black squares is where they were. This is where they are now. So the real process of development is this process of expanding the amount of person bytes that are in the society and the ability to recombine those person bytes to make the different products. And we're capturing that process in the way we look at the data. So when you look at what happened to income per capita in Ghana and Thailand, Ghana beat the hell out of Thailand in education, but not in outcomes. Okay? They went to different places. So why some countries are catching up and others are not? Well, one answer is that this is a graph, how many person bytes you have. This is our measure of economic complexity. And this is how close are other products from the things you know how to make. And interestingly enough, if you have very few person bytes, there are very few other things you could do with your few person bytes, even if I gave you one more. So these countries have very few opportunities here, and these are the countries that are not catching up. These countries in the middle are, diverse. There are some places like India where, given what they know how to make already, they can do 1,000 other things. But other places more like Russia, or my own countries probably around there, where given what they know, it's not that easy to move to the next things because the things they know are very unrelated to other things. They're not very centrally located in this network of things. So that's why we think that this approach allows us to help people figure out paths in which they can more easily accumulate person bytes. And so that's why we created this atlas, and this atlas is full of maps where we place people in that space. And as we say there, a map does not tell people where to go, but it does help them determine their destination and chart their course towards it. So we're producing this thing because we think that if people knew what the nature of the game was, they could play the game better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good. Any questions? No?
Should we take? We could take questions. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? There are some mics there. Yeah. Maybe Cesar, you can lead this because you're the student.
Yeah. So we can have a few minutes for questions, and then with anybody who have a question for Ricardo.
Okay, there's actually a microphones up there. Maybe you grab one of those. It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
And now I see where he gets his ideas.
I'm Mircea Mirescu from a Russian bank. How many countries knock on your door on an hourly basis to help them?
That's a very interesting question because when we ranked 128 countries and we're telling them where they are, what products are nearby, and so on, and we're developing this web tool, which I must say would not have happened had you not stolen Cesar from my shop, because this marriage of technology with science is particularly important. So we're going to put out this website, and that means that we hope that we will be able to cope with demand by just empowering people with tools. So technology is part of the answer, but we're busy. Yes.
So if you were advising somebody running for political office in the US about what policy prescriptions would follow from your findings, what might those be?
Well, I spend most of my time thinking about poorer countries, but I live here, so I was quite astonished at the fact that the US has had a significant decline in its presence in a lot of things. And in fact, the US is in the 17th percentile in terms of export growth over the last 20 years. So the US export performance has been dismal. US corporate performance has been astounding. So I think that a fundamental problem that is happening in the US is that US R&D, US ideas are fantastic. US production is lousy. So that Apple has 50,000 workers in the US and employs directly and indirectly 1 million people in China. So it's not, so people have been saying, look, focus on R&D, education, R&D, and so on, because we need new ideas. The new ideas are being generated in the US more than any other place. It is that they're not being implemented in the US. And so I would focus on that if I were thinking about the US. Back there?
Maybe. Do you mind walking up to them? Actually, go to the mic.
I'm almost there.
Okay. And I'm George Graham from Mars Incorporated. How would this then lead you to think about what are the right person bytes to add next to accelerate the right your value?
Well, that's I think that question should not be answered by a central planner. I think the world is a world of searchers who are looking to combine things, and you want to empower them with the ability to make those combinations. So that's why we put this map so that everybody can explore which person byte would make sense to add into making what. See, a fundamental story of what we're saying is that Thailand did not catch up because they were innovating at some technological margin. That is not the problem of the developing world. The problem of the developing world is learning to do at home things that the world knows how to do already, right? And the question is, what is next? So our tools hopefully provide everybody, investors, companies. If I'm a company, I already know how to make X. What could I do next given my capabilities, right? Or if I'm a mayor of a city and I see that, you know, I don't know, the garment industry is already shedding workers and I need some other game in town, what else would fit given the capabilities I already have? And our tools are meant to answer those questions. Okay? If I go to a venture capitalist and I say I want to put industry X in city Y, he can use the tool to say, gee, does city Y have what it takes to host that industry? And so on. So we hope that by providing more information, we will make those assessments of which person byte to invest in less risky, and consequently would encourage people to go more on this adventure of figuring this stuff out. Yes?
My name is Alex and I'm with Novartis. I'm curious about doing the same analysis on something like healthcare, where you can look at a complexity as solving an issue. So in the economic case, it's to create wealth. For healthcare, it could be delivery of patient care, and whether this kind of analysis could reveal nodes in which places for which healthcare is not adequately delivered, trying to figure out what is the next person byte or approach you could take to try and enable a better outcome. So I'm curious to see how your thoughts of applying this analysis to industry-specific problems.
This is, it's on our to-do list. See, what we have done up to now is to infer the person bytes indirectly. What's in our research agenda is how to shed more lights into the person bytes directly, to know exactly what are the capabilities that need to be there. And we have several strategies going forward, so stay tuned.
Yes. David Thomas, also from Mars.
Yeah. Yeah.
If your focus wasn't countries, and I'm just thinking companies, you know, global organizations, and I'm just thinking Mars, largely a food producer, should I be getting more diverse? I'm just wondering if implications from this stem to companies and organizations.
Well, this is very good. I appreciate your question because one of the typical things that happens is people confuse what's happening at different scales. So one of the mistakes that has been made at the opposite scale, at the national scale, is that people have tended to believe that countries need to specialize. Now, what we find is that countries don't specialize as they grow. As they grow, they diversify. People specialize. Companies specialize. If we go back to the medical question beforehand, you know, if you compare a rural medical facility with a major city hospital, in the rural medical facility, doctors are general practitioners. In the major city hospital, they are oncologists, radiologists, infectologists, or whatever it is that they know. So they individually have specialized, but the hospital has diversified. So specialization at one scale is what supports diversification at another scale. So countries diversify, firms might specialize, but firms also tend to diversify at some scale, right? They ask themselves, what is the next sensible product that I can make? And one way to ask that question, and you know, Bain and Company earn their living on it, is to say your core competencies. Ask yourself, what else could you do with your core competencies? Well, we think we can shed some light to that question. The other thing we think corporations can use this for is to say, look, I need to establish my next benzene plant. Where should I put it? Where will I find an ecosystem that can support this manufacturer, can support this kind of activity? And there we can inform that too. That is, how appropriate is a country or a setting in our next venture, a city, to host a particular activity, given the person bytes that we know are there because we know the other things that they're doing. So we hope that they will find it particularly useful too. Yes?
It seems that most, this Glenn Doreen from Hearst Publications, it seems that most of your research is around material objects, and you mentioned that the U.S. is becoming, a lot of the great ideas are coming out of the U.S. So how does intellectual property and the economics of IP fit into this?
Well, absolutely. You know, that's actually in a different line of research. I have argued that the U.S. does not have an external payments problem. The U.S. over the last 7 years has borrowed something like $3 trillion from the rest of the world. What is 5% of $3 trillion? It's $150 billion a year. So you'd expect the U.S. may be paying $150 billion, maybe $100 billion a year to the rest of the world because it borrowed $3 trillion from the rest of the world. Well, the U.S. isn't paying anything. It isn't paying anything because while the U.S. overall has borrowed, I don't know, $18 trillion from the rest of the world, it has also invested like $12 trillion in the rest of the world. But the $12 trillion it has invested in the rest of the world, it has invested mixed with their know-how, with their person bytes. So they get a 10% return. When China invests in U.S. Treasury bonds, they don't bring person bytes. So they get 2%. So actually, the U.S. is getting an enormous international return as a country on its person bytes, on the value, on its global value of its person bytes. And that is reflected in the fact that 50% of the profits of the S&P 500 come from abroad. Now that is good for American corporations. It's somewhat indifferent for American workers. So my point is American intellectual property services and so on, they're doing great. That's not where the problem is. The employment problem and this perception of inequality and so on that has been generated is generated by the fact that there's less percolation of great American ideas into great American activity. Well, I am overtaking my stay. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.